Okay. Welcome everybody to Mooresville, our little chunk of North Carolina. We're going to have a little discussion today. My name is Sean Pogue. This is Michael Neville. He's in charge of our grinding service. And we're sitting in front of our fantastic CNC grinder and coming from our grinding room here in the demo area. What we'd like to do today is just kind of open up for some discussions on types of knife steel. When do we apply what type? Michael, I think I'll turn it over to you, and you experience a lot of this through our grinding service.
Thanks.
And of course, excuse me, any questions you guys have, fire them off. We have somebody moderating our question line there, and we'll get them taken care of.
Great. So, good afternoon, everyone. One of the biggest questions I get asked in the grinding service daily almost is different types of knife steel and how they apply to different types of species of lumber. And in our tooling catalog, we have this great recommendation chart that is on page 22, but this only includes a handful of these species. And oftentimes we get asked questions about additional species that aren't here, and we just ask that you call in for those. But for example, everyone wants to know how long can they run a species of lumber with what type of steel. So we have various different types of steel here. And one of the bigger questions I get is, how long is this going to run? And that's a difficult question to answer.
It is very difficult. And a lot of times Mike may come out and ask me a specific instance with a customer. And what's one of the first things I ask you? What's the grade of lumber? We can't answer a specific length of time that a type of knife steel will last. Per se, if I'm looking at something, you guys may know these terms as a FAS. And ends up you're running one or two common. So there's going to be a lot more voids or knots, loose knots, grain transitions, things like that in those materials. So therefore it would shorten the length of a traditional sharpen on that knife.
And so, again, not an easy question. And like Sean said, lots of factors come into play here. So a lot of times, we have to ask these questions to our customers and really get in depth if they really want a valued, honest answer, best suggestion. So on all of these different types of steel here, let's talk first about our entry level.
Hang on just a second, Mike. Sure. Where would the customer find this online?
This is in the tooling catalog. It's our 22nd edition, and it is on our website. It's the tooling, WeinigUSA.com. So you can go in and find a link to this, and this is downloadable. So you can get this information, have it. There's a lot of other great resources in here as well that relate to the knife steel, which we'll talk about in just a bit.
So this is for all you grinder guys. Make a copy of that, have the front office laminate it, keep it in your tool room.
Very valuable. Lots of good information in here. So tool steel. Mm-hmm. Our SRS or economy grade steel, short run steel, it's a D2 based steel. We don't use this a lot in the grinding service. Not a lot of customers use this.
Why would a customer choose that type of steel?
Most of the time it's based off of two things, price and just a short run. Now, my question to that though for short run stuff is, you can't use it on everything, obviously.
Sure.
But a pretty wide range.
So maybe a test profile for a customer before they maybe get a big job, something like that. We're keeping the price of the material down because we know it's not going to be running production for us.
Okay. All right. And then next thing we have up which is quite popular actually, is our M2.
Yep.
And a lot of customers, I think that, especially on the East Coast, that joint seem to really like the M2. Can you explain a little bit why that is the case?
Well, a lot of that, it all gets pretty deep. But the main thing is the folks that are running the high speeds and doing a lot of the jointing, they're usually running some form of finger jointed pine or pine itself, radiata, whatever the case may be. And it just reacts a little differently with pine. So same way with all you window guys, if you're watching, we know that's a steel of choice for you guys just because of the types of pine that you're running in your windows.
Okay. And what about outside of that? Most of my questions or customers that use that are primarily shorter run customers that are really using that, just their steel of choice.
Yeah.
So,
yep.
And then next,
if we back up just a second to that, to the M2, and this is going to segue into the next size or type. The M2 is what Weinig used to have back in the late 80s, early 90s. It was a premier knife steel. It was the thing everybody went to, whether you were joining not joining, that was the steel to use. It ground well, it ran well, gave us good length of run and stuff like that, which then brought us into how do we make the M2 better? And we started using the M3, and we actually put the plus on the end because there's a different mixture on that for us, and really bridged the gap in between the next type of harder steel to deal with. It was a little difficult to grind or harder to grind, and the M3 was a really good balance between the two of those.
Okay. And real quick with the M2, this is the only steel that we offer that's in 1/4 inch and 5/16.
Okay. Yep.
So then that leads us into the M3, which this I would say is definitely our best seller next to the Super 18 in the grinding service. A lot of people are familiar with this steel and really like this steel.
Yep.
Get very good results with it.
Like I said, it's a good steel, even a little bit higher than a mid-range steel, but it grinds very well. And you guys know, you spend some time in front of a grinder, you get a feel for how the grinding wheel acts on the knife steel. A lot of that has to do with, too, that you don't have excessive burning on the knives. Yes, you need to keep the coolant system flushing on the material while you're grinding it, but it grinds in a little softer, quicker way that helps things break down easier and grinds faster.
Okay, great.
But still gives you a good tip on the production runs for a linear molding run.
All right, next up, which this is also, like I said, one of the more common ones that we sell is the Supra 18. And when I started here in the grinding service, most of our regular customers, their steel of choice was the M3. I started kind of pushing and promoting the Supra because the cost is pretty insignificant. It's just slightly more than the M3. And a lot of my customers that were using the M3 consistently, they would try the Super 18 one time and then say, okay, I want to use that unless I tell you otherwise. Oh. So there's a noticeable difference there because I'm getting the feedback. So that's a positive. And I know that has more tungsten. Is there anything else about that particular steel or other species?
Again, it's just a little bit, I would say, more brittle. You guys that do grind, you would feel a more brittleness to it. But what that is again, it's given us more of a certain material in there to help give us some density in the product, to give you a good sharp tip, but still carry on with a longer run than normal.
And some of our customers from experience do have some success on short runs of MDF with that steel as well.
Yep.
And that's a question that we get asked a lot too. Customers that aren't familiar with MDF and would like to try to use high-speed steel, in most cases can't, but if it's a short run, they can get away with it on that.
So that nicely segues into, whoops, throwing stuff around here next.
Into our DLC. And the DLC is it's a coated steel. It's an M2 based steel, but it's coated. It's a diamond-alike coating, and it does offer some benefits in certain products. It's also got a coating on it that it's a little reduces the heat, I guess, and a little more.
Gives you a little more longevity. Yeah, it's again, all of these steels kind of step in between each other as bridges to the next phase or type of steel that you would be using. Of course, that depends on your end product. So looking at the DLC or the coated steels, it is a softer steel. The actual base of the material is clear back to an M2, but you have to have a soft enough steel for the coating to actually penetrate the surface of the material, so it's not just flaking off during your runs or when you're grinding that's dragging across the tool rest, those kind of things. So a lot of times I do know that people will use that coated steel. Again, it's they may be putting in for a job. It's a great big production run with some large facility, but they don't want to invest in all of the tooling at once, and it could even be MDF. And that's enough to get through a pretty good, decent run, not the normal type of run for MDF, but enough to get the samples out to the customers and then be ready to move on to the next type.
So up next, we jump up to carbide, and we've got two different types of carbide here. We'll talk about the TCT inlaid carbide first, which is a one-piece knife, and it has the carbide is brazed to the steel.
Yep.
The TCT works well in my experience with my customers. A lot of people that run soft maple have really good luck with this. Also some MDF. There's a lot of various uses for this, and it does offer quite a bit longer lineal footage runs than the steel.
So the typical question I ask these guys whenever they come out and say, hey, we got this customer, blah, 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 and they want to use the inlaid carbide or not sure to go to double back carbide, what's my first question?
Have they run it before?
And do they have knots?
Yes.
So the main reason is, again, we're talking about I don't know if you can see this in the camera, but there's a laminated piece of carbide on top of a piece of high-speed steel. Again, it's got to be a soft enough steel the brazing grabs and holds the material in place. But what this is used for is it's a little softer grade of carbide, and of course when you're motoring through a knot, the knife can tend to shudder some. Not necessarily that you might not have the knife tight enough in the head, but it's just the natural tendency. There's stresses on that knife as it's cutting, and you hit a harder or a denser section of that board, the knife kind of shudders and then calms down and keeps running. So the next step of carbide, more for longevity, is the double back. It's a two-piece system. But what we have to watch for is we don't want that shudder to cause problems and possibly fracture the carbide. It's a very, very brittle plate. It's just a compression form of small molecules put this stuff together. So if we're running knots, we would suggest using the inlaid carbide because it's going to be a little more forgiving and kind of settle itself into hitting those transition points. Where we'd really aim for using the double back type of carbide is a knot-free material. You can still run it with wood, but it was originally designed to run the MDFs, be it the re-refined MDF, any kind of a man-made composite that's very consistent, such as your cellular PVC, PVSs, all of your broad range of MDFs that are out there. So it's a knife that's very well versed in the man-made stuff, and that's kind of what we want to stick to because we don't want that shuddering vibration to happen on those parts. So it looks like we got a question.
What are you saying is a good size run when you refer to a good size run of molding?
It kind of depends on your production style. If you are a small job shop, you're running kind of a just-in-time application, then a decent run. I used to do a lot of trim carpentry, so we would run amounts for a home, and let's say it's a paint grade surface. We'd be running maybe some poplar or something like that. A decent sized run is about 1,500 to 2,000 feet. Okay. From that, we can make some of the decisions then of what grade is that material that we're going to be running. Is it paint grade? Is it stain grade? Are there knots? Is it a FAS or whatever you may be calling it, or a 1 or 2 common?
Moisture content too is a question that comes up frequently too.
Okay. So I hope that answered your question. Just kind of a medium-sized run is generally around a 1,500 to 2,000 foot range. And that's generally what we would say, hey, if you're any more than that, we kind of need to put you in the next knife steel. If you're any less than that, let's go with a cheaper grade, but it may not be a production run for you. It may not become a stock item for you. So hopefully that helped.
Yeah, and again, in this tooling catalog, a lot of this information is in here with these approximate lineal footage runs.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a great tool to look at, go in here, and if you get in this and you see or you don't see what you're looking for, you can call us and we can have a better conversation about that. So
yep.
Very helpful.
So Michael did just say something about moisture content, and that is super, super important. We can have the best looking lumber in the world, but if it's too wet or too dry, it's going to cause us other issues. Too wet can cause fuzzing on the board and then force us to have to do some sanding afterwards. Too dry can actually make the wood too brittle, and then the knives are actually ripping or pulling chunks of wood out of it instead of just slicing through the fibers nicely. So yeah, all of these questions can come together, but those are the things these guys have to handle in our grinding service all the time.
Exactly, and a lot of times, it's not a quick answer because sometimes we do need to consult with Sean and dig into this stuff a little deeper so that we can provide the best possible solution to, whatever scenario our customer has. So it's critical for us to ask these questions. Sometimes it can be a little tedious and maybe a little frustrating sometimes, I think, from our customer standpoint. But, in the end, we're just trying to provide the best possible solution.
So that does cover most of our types of knife steel that we sell. I don't know if you can see this or not, but I'll let Michael talk about some of the services that we offer in the grinding service. You don't just have to call in and buy a freshly ground, finished up knife from us. If you don't want to, we can do some pre-hogging for you. I'll let Mike talk about that.
Sure. And the way I approach this subject is, the grinding service is kind of the business within the business here at Weinig. And we do meet our customers where they're at. So for example, if you have a grinder and you just want to buy acrylic templates, we'd be happy to provide you with acrylic templates. We also have steel templates we can provide you. These are cut on a wire EDM machine, so they're extremely accurate. So we can do that. In addition to that, we do offer rough ground and finished ground knives. This knife here, I don't know if you can really pick this up very well, but this is a rough cut knife that was pre-hogged or pre-cut on the water jet. And basically the way we do this is we take that profile and we offset the profile about 50 thousandths, and we lay that out on the machine, and then we cut it at approximately a 25-degree angle so it closely matches the grind angle. We can adjust that for our customers that are jointing so that we can achieve a closer angle, so you have to remove less material. And then we also have our finished ground knife, which basically we pre-hog probably 90% of our knives on the water jet before we grind them. So, you're not introducing all that heat into the knife when you're grinding it. So that's a benefit as well.
So I've heard, Mike, that we could take this knife right off the water jet and go to the molder with it. Is that a true statement?
That's not a true statement, and that's happened before, believe it or not. The other thing that I get a lot is customers will think that they can take this knife and throw it in their head and put their CBN wheel on it and finish grind it. Not the case. You absolutely have to still make some roughing passes with that knife, put your side clearance in, those kind of things. But it saves a huge amount of time. As you can imagine, having to hog all that steel out by hand takes a long time. Saves money on grinding wheels, less wear and tear on your grinder. But time is the biggest thing with that for my customers. The time to everyone is the most important next to the cost.
We all know time is money.
That's right.
So with this said, there's a lot of people that will just say, hey, you know what, I'm really busy. Yes, I have a full-time grinder guy, but instead of asking him to stand in front of the grinder and just go through hogging all this stuff out and taking 20, 30 minutes to do that, just have it done on the water jet. You're going to purchase the knife steel anyways, and it's not that much more just to have it water jetted out. We have no other questions?
What's the lead time for rough ground knives versus finished ground knives?
So the lead time on rough ground knives is 1 to 2 days from the time that they're approved. For finished ground knives, it's 3 to 5 days, and that's based off of the current status of our schedule and how busy we are. Rough ground knives, pretty quick. We try to get them out the same day when possible, depending on what time it is.
Okay, hope that answers your question. So some of you grinder guys out there that stand in front of one of those things all day long, I have seen a lot of times, even with training classes or being out on an install or whatever the case may be, that when folks are done grinding a knife, there's all kinds of ways that people deburr a tool. And there's a right way and a wrong way. And most of the time, all of the time, what you should do is after the knife is ground, yes, we sell honing stones, all kinds of other things, but after that knife is ground, we don't want to just go back and forth seesawing on that burr. It's just going to take too much time to get it off, and you could be damaging these other edges where that stone is running into the end of it as you come on and off of that profile. So the proper way to do it is, since we've already changed the molecular structure of that knife steel and created the burr, and then the water has cooled it off, it's easier to just come across, drag that burr up and off of the knife, and it'll just roll off with your finger then. You can see it laying on the edge of the tool. So rather than kind of the old school way of doing it was just to take a chunk of wood that was laying around, guys are picking them up off of the floor, and then just start dragging it along this edge to pull the little wiry edges left from deburring that. So what we do sell, instead of just finding a chunk of lumber somewhere, is these rubberized graphite sticks. You can see they're very flexible, pliable, a couple different shapes. But what it is, again, I'm going to repeat myself, it's rubberized graphite. So when we are finished with deburring that tool, we basically just drag that rubberized graphite right across the edge of our knife, not being aggressive, but it just acts like kind of a small vacuum cleaner, and it's pulling all those particles off of the edge of the tool. Because the worst thing that can happen to us is spend a lot of time, make a beautiful knife, get it out to the molder, and nobody cleaned the burr off of the back side. And the very first thing that happens when it engages that lumber is it rolls the burr back over into the cutting face, and we've got a nick in the board before we ever even start production. Very, very frustrating, and I'd say time consuming, because now we've got to bring it back into the to the grinding area, resharpen the tool, and go through the whole process. So
Yep.
very, very nice tool here for you to use. Easy to deal with. It wears itself out, and eventually you just buy another one.
And that applies to all high-speed steel,
Yes.
with the exception of the coated steel,
The
correct?
coated steel is worth doing as well because, again, the base of it is a high-speed M2 high-speed steel, so it's pretty soft on the inside, and it could create a burr.
Okay.
And that kind of goes into, I know we got a question here. I want to finish my sentence real quick. It kind of goes into what types of wheels do we use to cut, or what works best with each of these types of knife steels. Question?
Going back to the grinding service, so when you say the approval process,
Yeah.
can you go through what that means and how long does that take?
Sure. So typically, we'll receive a request via email, fax, phone call. We provide an approval drawing. We have up to 48 hours to supply that drawing. Most of the time it's done faster than that, just relates again to our schedule. So once we get you that drawing and it's approved, then our lead time clock starts from the time that drawing is approved. Anything that's approved after 2 p.m., we roll to the next day. All right.
Okay.
Perfect. Hope that answers the question.
So getting back to them, I know I'm going to focus more on some of these guys that may be grinding or have ground and know some of the pains of it. For some of the guys that have a little older grinder, there was a different style of grinder we used for a while, and it had a threaded unit where we would index the dresser for dressing the vitrified grinding wheels. And what that was a problem about is it didn't allow us to do anything about dressing our CBN or our diamond wheels. So what we typically have is, for the CBN and diamond wheels, is a chrome moly stick. And that simply switches in and out from our diamond dresser to the chrome moly stick for doing those CBN and diamond wheels. So they could not actually dress a wheel properly. And it was said by some folks that you could use the original diamond that came on the grinder to do that dressing on the wheel. You could, but it'd also chew up your diamond and wear out the wheel prematurely. So what we have to offer for those threaded in units is a kit. Again, it's in your tooling catalog online, but basically you thread your old system out, you thread your new system in, and then that simply allows you to put this chrome moly stick in, and then we can simply dress just like we do traditionally with a diamond wheel or a diamond on a vitrified wheel, and get those diamond wheels correct, get the CBN wheels correct, so that we're actually matching the tracing pin as it's going across the template itself. So that's very, very important, and you will notice a huge difference. And a lot of times what it would do is kind of, people say, well, if I can't dress my CBN wheel, they would try to use a CBN wheel and just wouldn't like it in the end. And that's a bad thing to choose, because that CBN wheel has a much finer grit and produces a much, much nicer edge on the finished product.
And I'll speak to that just a little bit, because I do get a lot of questions from grindermen that call us with questions. So a lot of times I will come to Sean with these more technical questions, but dressing the wheel, I mean, can you kind of stress the importance? Because I think that's overlooked sometimes on how important that is to do and when to do it.
Yeah, it's super, super important that anytime we have a grinding wheel, the shape and width of that grinding wheel must match what our tracing pin is. And anytime we deviate from that match, we run the risk of either opening up our profile or making the profile too small, and then it doesn't match up what we're looking for on the machine. A lot of times if customers' shop tolerances are a little bit larger, 10 thousandths or more, well, they don't really care about that. It's close enough, let it rip. The more you get into tighter tolerances where you're running components that have to fit together, you're running dowels where the blends have to be correct from point to point. We've got to make sure that the wheel size is correct, the radius is dressed correct. So it's very, very important, even when we are dressing just a general vitrified wheel for the hogging process per se. There are two types of diamonds that we do sell, and again, this is in your book. What comes with the grinder standard from the factory is just a very small single point diamond. You probably can't see it from there, but it's just one single point diamond in there. As that wears, that diamond naturally, from a point down, gets wider and wider until it's just a blunt surface. very difficult and you get a whole lot of feedback on the wheel and it's tough to get it to dress. So we do offer a backup rather than just having to buy another diamond every time it gets to that point. And it's called a multi-point diamond. And basically there's small chunks of particle in there, and that really allows you to dress that vitrified wheel nicely. It's smooth. You get really good feedback of how it's dressing on the wheel, and you get good feedback that you're actually opening the pores better on the wheel. And those pores, or those crater surfaces, peaks, is what's actually doing the cutting for us with that vitrified wheel. And that's pretty much the same statement for any of the bonded wheels like we use here on the R1000, or what we would use on the R960 as a CBN finishing wheel. We have to make sure that we're keeping all of those pores open to allow the metal to go through them, the coolant to go through them, and keep those surfaces of those, if you think about a crater on the moon, the top end of that crater is what's actually doing the cutting. As that gets more dull and flattens out, it exposes the next crater, and on through that wheel. So even with the man-made wheels like this for a CBN or a diamond, we also have to use not a dressing stick like a diamond here, but we actually use a cleaning stick. So as the grit of our wheel gets smaller and smaller to make a more fine, sharp grind, we also use these cleaning sticks to plunge into that wheel and pull all the sediment out of it that could be compressed into those craters. So it makes the wheel cut better. A better cutting wheel is a faster cutting wheel and a sharper cutting wheel, which of course translates to getting us through a grind faster.
Very good. One other question that I get asked a lot, and there seems there's a lot of opinion on this, but there's really only one right way to do it, is coolant.
Yep.
So I get calls all the time from grindermen or shops where they want to know how much coolant to use, what is the ratio, and all the different things that come into play with that. So
I forgot to get this out, but if you'll excuse me for just a second. The proper answer to that is yes, there is a value that we should be mixing our coolant to. Whether it's in the 960 itself, just kind of in the old days, if we were not using diamond wheels or CBN wheels, things like that, we just kind of felt the coolant. And you guys that's been out there grinding for a long time, you know what I'm talking about. If it gets too sticky and syrupy, well, we've got too much coolant in, add some water, and so forth. But as we really start to dial in with some of these wheel manufacturers about, how good the wheels are, well, they also have to have good coolant, and the mixes have to be correct. So the old school theory was, the only reason we put coolant in is to keep the machine from rusting. And that is not necessarily the case. Yes, it is a byproduct of that, and it's good for us to keep that from happening. You can see all the exposed metal on this machine. So when the door's down, it's being flooded with coolant. But also, to help keep track of that a little better is, and again, I keep referencing the tooling catalog, is what we call a refractometer. This will basically take and give you a percentage of what your coolant to water ratio is and what we need to keep it at. So especially on a machine like this, it's very, very important that we maintain that ratio. So if we know it's important here to protect the wheels and to protect the machine, we need to know that it's important for a traditional 960 grinder as well. So when you get into some place where, South Florida, where it's very, very humid, it's easy for those machines to get very, very rusty. So the percentage of coolant might come up a little bit. Someplace up in the Northeast somewhere where it's very cold all the time, we've got to keep that water from freezing necessarily. Not everybody gets to have heat in the winter up there. So I hope that answered that question, but it's very important that we do use some sort of a reference system for this so that we know exactly what that mixture is. So we are protecting the machine and we're protecting the wheels. So another thing, if you don't mind, we'll continue a little bit. This goes back to the shape of the wheel versus, let's say, our tracing pin. The wheel and the pin have to match. We've discussed that. I've said it 25 times so far. But so when that happens, we're using these things up. We're running a tracing pin across this plastic edge. It a lot of times kind of acts like a file. So what will happen is this radius edge on our tracing pin can get flattened off. Once that's flattened off, it doesn't matter how good we dress our wheel, we're going to cause problems because the ratio of pin size to wheel size is incorrect. So the age-old problem is that guys will just run a pin till it's dead because the boss won't spend any more money on it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it
Yeah,
happens.
It happens.
So what we have done, especially for our grinding services, guys are standing in front of those grinders all day long, and they'll go through a pin in a matter of a couple of weeks just because they're running all day. So we've done some testing with a local company and come up with a couple of really nice solutions of a little bit harder pin. And Mike, if you want to elaborate on this, you've been a little deeper involved with it. But we've also put the radius on both sides, so we're not just using up one side of the pin, having to throw it away. So it's given us a little more longevity because we got two sides. But there's another thing behind the curtain there that's helping us with that. You want to explain that?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. We've got this treated pin that we started carrying definitely lasts a lot longer. We've tested it in-house quite a bit, and it works really well. And it's also, they're double-sided, so that you're essentially getting two pins in one. Mm-hmm. You can flip it. Something else that we're still testing and working on in-house is we've actually created a solid carbide pin. And the carbide pin so far has done fantastic. We've used one for close to a year in the grinding service.
A year.
Now, obviously, the cost of these things is going to be more than your standard $40 pin. But once we get some finalized testing done, we'll probably release this out. We just want to make sure it's what we hoped it would be, and it turns out that it seems to be that way.
How long do normal pins normally last?
Well, I'll let Sean talk about this too, but from my perspective, a standard pin, I mean, I've seen my guys wear them out in literally days. Mm-hmm. Just they're grinding, 15 knives or 15 sets a day potentially, and they literally would replace these in a couple of days. They may last a week. Yep. So it really just depends, and it depends a lot on the grinder person too. I think too, some people are a little more heavy-handed. Everybody's a little different. There's some things that come into play there. Template material can, I'm sure, we only use this green material, but there's a lot of other materials out there, and some customers use the steel. The idea is you want the template, whatever it is, to wear, or the pin rather, to wear before the material, because the pin is a wear item, but you also want them to last. The templates are much cheaper, plastic ones, so if you're using a carbide pin and you wear out these are $10 to replace, so it makes sense.
Another thing, yes, I'll just chime in on that a little bit. Part of the reason answering that question or going with that question is when we get these templates made, if you can just take a jeweler's loop and look at the edge of some of these big radiuses, even like this one right here, you'll notice that because of the way that the template maker runs its bit across here, it's a kind of a stepping motor that's on there. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, it's making a serrated edge. So it even makes it more abrasive than just the plastic itself. So little tip, anytime you guys have something like that that's a radius or a smooth running radius anywhere, like a big crown mold or something, just gently, I say gently, take a little bit of emery cloth or some fine sandpaper, put it around a stick of some sort so you have something that's constant, and just gently go over top. And all we're wanting to do is knock the peaks off of all those little lines or steps that's in there. And that'll help a lot, but it won't fix the problem 100%. So again, that's why we're always looking at how do we make our stuff better? How do we make it stronger? How do we make it last longer?
Another question, is the tool life extended when proper coolant is maintained in the machine?
Tool life? Not necessarily tool life as much as it does give a better edge on the knife steel itself for the end use out on the molder. What it also does is the more we can flood that area of where the grinding is happening, the more those particles are being taken away from the actual cutting area. And therefore it runs cleaner, the wheels last longer, they cut better, and kind of on down the line there.
Okay.
So anything else, Michael, you got you want to go over?
I think we covered all of our knife
You
steel.
want to mention the grinding sheet there?
Yeah, so we do. This is not available. This portion or this front page actually is in the tooling catalog, but we do have a price list here. If anybody is interested, you can please call Weinig and get to the grinding service. Myself or any one of my associates would be happy to discuss any of this information with you. We can review pricing. We can email this to you. We also have some great flat rate shipping charges that we put in place probably almost 2 years ago that are really beneficial. So if you've got questions or you need more information, we're here to help. Just give us a call.
And one last thing on the way out, we just want to let you guys know the reason we're putting out these videos is because we are still getting it. Corona is not going to take us down. We are still here. And we also are doing live videos for demonstrations. If you guys are interested in equipment, just contact Christian Smedberg and we can get that fixed up for you. And I hope everybody's staying safe and healthy.
Question is the
One more question.
Is the tooling catalog free? And do you offer a stock profile catalog?
Yes, the tooling catalog is free, and we do have a profile catalog that a hard copy that we can send out as well. If you're interested and you need that, again, give me a call the grinding service, and we can ship you the profile catalog as well.
Okay, and another question is, will you have a class on the R1000?
A training video type of, yeah, most likely we will, yes. Right now we're in the heart of doing a lot of grinding on this thing, getting the tools ready for a brand new machine we have in that's a 300 foot a minute machine. So we got to grind up some 8-wing tools, and I'm letting old Rondomat 1000 do it. So,
All right.
Thank you very much for your time. Hope you all are staying safe out there and keeping your distance.
Thank you.
Till next time.